Today's debate is on question 4, whether to legalize certain psychedelic drugs. Voting yes on question 4 would allow naturally occurring psychedelic drugs like psilocybin, mescaline, DMT to be grown, shared, used at home, and offered by licensed professionals in a clinical setting. It would not establish a retail market, unlike the marijuana legalization process of a couple of years ago. Voting no on question 4 would maintain the status quo where psychedelics are illegal at the state level. Joining us now from the yes side is Emily Oneschuk, the grassroots campaign director for Massachusetts for Mental Health Options. She served in the U.S. Navy as an explosive ordnance disposal and diving officer and found psychedelics to be an important tool to improve her own mental health after leaving the military. Emily, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here. From the no side, Dr. Nassir Ghaemi is a psychiatrist and researcher specializing in depression and bipolar illness. He's a professor of psychiatry at Tufts Medical Center in Boston, clinical lecturer at Harvard Medical School, president of the Mass Psychiatric Society. Dr. Nassir, it's good to have you too. Thank you both for being here.
Yeah, thank you both for joining in. So let's start with you, Emily. Why do you think this is a good idea?
Yeah, so, I come to this because it's deeply personal for me, right? And I really like the way we approach it. So we have the regulated framework and we have the decriminalization aspect. And it's not like cannabis, like Jim mentioned, right? There's no retail sales. But this transformed my life. 7 years ago, I lost my brother to gun violence. At the same time, I was the first female Navy SEAL candidate. And that pressure cooker stayed a pressure cooker through my time on active duty, about 5 years. And when I let the release valve off, I had PTSD, depression, anxiety. And, life was challenging. And went through conventional treatments at the VA. I wasn't seeing much improvement, and life kept getting darker, which wasn't what I expected to happen. And I knew psychedelic therapy was an option, but I was nervous, right? Like, I would have to fly out of the country to take drugs I had never done before. My parents were scared. I was scared. But I knew there was a lot of research going on. I knew there was research going on in Massachusetts. And I, did my homework and went through what was a really transformative experience for me. Which is how I ended up advocating for it now. I forgot what it was like to feel good for the better part of a decade. And when you're only, at the time I was 27, like that's a big chunk of your life that I wanted back. So, I saw these things transform my life. I've seen them transform so many other people's lives. And, I believe it's a really important option for people to have during what is a mental health crisis.
Dr. Ghaemi, why should people vote no?
Well, this ballot question is really not about mental health primarily. It's about unregulated legalization with home growth and distribution for recreational use and abuse. So it's going to be harmful to the public health by causing traffic accidents, emergency room visits, overwhelming our hospitals. It's going to be harmful to patients with mental illnesses who actually get worse and more psychotic with these drugs, which we'll talk about. And it does not solve the mental health crisis in a general sense. You have to understand that these substances are, scientifically, the term for them is hallucinogens. They cause hallucinations and delusions. That's their effect. Now, there may be, under certain circumstances, some benefits to that if the harms are mitigated, but to legalize them all the way for anybody to take grow it in their bedroom and take it when they want to, goes way too far and is way too dangerous.
You want to respond to any of that, Emily?
Yeah, so I want to circle back to, you say this isn't for mental health, and I strongly disagree with that, right? This is a mental health option. We don't, say it's a panacea, but, something that I like to think about is if we could have addressed the mental health crisis with traditional medications, through tools that we already have, we would have addressed it already. But 17 veterans die by suicide every day. I lose a member of the EOD community probably every other month. I had a friend text me last week that one of his veteran buddies at, the college he's attending killed himself. And I'm really tired of sitting by the sidelines waiting for someone else to come up with an option that, frankly, I haven't heard of. So this is an option that we can act on right now. I feel very passionately about it, and so do a lot of other veterans.
Emily, let me clarify something, though. That the setting that you engaged in was a structured, supervised setting. Am I right about that?
Yes.
This ballot question goes way beyond that. It goes, people can grow on their own. They can share with other people with no supervision, no structure. Why didn't you limit, for example, I think it's Oregon that has limited one drug to start, psilocybin, and it's got to be in a licensed, structured setting. Why not start with that rather than this expansive version that you and your colleagues have proposed?
Yep, so the two-part approach I think is really important. I actually didn't feel that way initially. and it took me a little while to wrap my head around it because the structure for me was very important. But what I had to come to realize was that hundreds of thousands of people are using these already, right? And they're using them without being able to talk to their healthcare provider about it. They're not able to get vetted information anywhere but the internet. So keeping them criminalized is just keeping the stigma up where people aren't getting information on what responsible safe use looks like.
You know, Doctor, you mentioned the homegrown angle as being upsetting to you. Suppose that we're not in this. Suppose that we're just going to a clinic and paying apparently $1,000 would be the amount of money, which is not cheap, but going to a clinic and receiving these substances in a controlled setting with some sort of therapist.
Yeah, I'll answer that. Let me just mention, decriminalization does not require a full-scale legalization in an unregulated way where you can grow these things in your spare bedroom.
Would you support decriminalization?
Yes, and I think most people do. And in fact, it's just that all that would take is a vote by the legislature.
Did you ever
don't need
propose that to did the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society propose that to the legislature?
Well, we actually weren't involved in any of this until the venture capital millions put this on the ballot question a year ago. We didn't get involved till the last few months.
Okay,
but we'd be
continue.
happy to. Yeah, so decriminalization does not require this ballot question. That's point number one. Point number two, you know, it's interesting to me that people talk about mental health options and then they ignore people with mental illnesses. People who have schizophrenia, bipolar illness, and some severe forms of depression represent 5% of the population. That's hundreds of thousands of citizens of Massachusetts. They have psychotic states naturally as part of their diseases. If you give them drugs that cause psychotic states, hallucinations, delusions, they will get worse. If you give me a minute, I could like to describe a case of mine, one of my own
Briefly,
patients.
if you can, sure.
Because I'm a doctor, I treat patients, I see them clinically. And I have a patient who was in her early 20s who got ayahuasca twice for mild depression. And then she developed a much more severe depression. It got worse. She got fully psychotic with delusions and hallucinations, ended up in the hospital for 6 months, catatonic, which means she couldn't move, eat, drink, or talk. She had to get a feeding tube. And eventually she got better with electroshock treatments, and now she's on psychiatric medications. Her family knows these drugs are dangerous, but she can't really come up here and talk about it for privacy reasons. And we doctors see these situations in our practices, but you don't know about it in public. She's not coming up here to tell her tragedy. That's why the American Psychiatric Association, which represents 40,000 psychiatrists in the country, the majority of psychiatrists, opposes this ballot question in Massachusetts formally. The Massachusetts Psychiatric Society, which is a state branch which I belong to, represents 1,500 psychiatrists, the majority in the state. We formally oppose it. The Massachusetts Medical Society, which represents 25,000 physicians in the state and publishes the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, formally opposes this bill because we see the patients and we see the harms.
We got it.
But what I was asking, though, is if this were not the homegrown in the bedroom, as you put it, and this were just in a clinic with a therapist,
Yeah.
because as everybody knows, we have a mental health epidemic.
Right.
Most people get no treatment because they can't afford it or there aren't any therapists. And even if they do get treatment, as you know better than I do, could be years finding the right so-called cocktail,
Right.
So why not in a supervised setting? What's wrong with that?
So 2 points on that. One is what the setting actually is in this ballot question, and the other is the actual research on this. In the ballot question, it specifically states that it cannot be restricted to medical professionals or mental health professionals as the so-called licensed facilitators in these so-called therapy centers.
Well,
And in
Well, let him
Oregon,
finish
just
and
a
then we'll
second,
get you.
in Oregon, they have high school degrees and take a 3-month course on hallucinogens. So you're going to have facilitators who have high school degrees, and they're not going to be adequately educated to screen out the people
got
with
it.
bipolar.
Let's have
and-
Emily.
and
The
to manage
time
the
is
side
imbalanced
effects.
here. We
Yeah.
want to try to get back in balance. Go
you
ahead,
know,
Emily.
to hit on the medical professionals, so my facilitators were not medical professionals, right? These are people that were trained through various routes, and I think we overlook the value of the indigenous roots of this. A lot of this healing comes from history that's a lot older than us, and doesn't require you to be a medical professional. And the other thing I'd like to say about, so I'm not a doctor, but I am a patient, and I do have a doctor. And I went to my doctor at the VA, and she said, "What are you doing for your PTSD and depression anxiety?" And I said, "I'm doing psilocybin mushrooms." And she said, "Do you saute those?" And I said, "No." And I told her what they were, and she went white as a sheet and said, "Please stop using them." And I was like, that was not the response I hoped for, right? I was hoping for a conversation. I was hoping for some, being informed. I was hoping for some curiosity. And what I feel like, and Dr. Ghaemi mentioned, people, right, there's a lot of people that have mental health issues that are probably using these already. In fact, the highest case usage we see is people with depression who are probably not talking to their doctors about them because of the stigma, because they fear what could happen if they were open. So by keeping them in the dark, people aren't going to stop using them.
By the way, I know people who are doing exactly what Emily's talking about, friends who are using them, and again, they're illegal in Massachusetts. So why not bring them in to daylight, even if imperfect, and then go to the legislature and say, we should make sure that the therapy centers have medical people rather than people who don't have to have medical degrees. Improve it rather than kill it.
Well, so if this ballot question passes, it becomes the law. The legislature can't change the
That is
question.
totally untrue.
It can change
That is totally
it can change
untrue.
how it's implemented, but it
No,
can't
no, no.
change
They
the law.
can repeal it. I used to do ballot
Okay.
campaigns. They can repeal it. They can amend it. They can leave it as it. It's a law like any other the
Okay.
legislature
All right.
can
Well,
fix.
I'll take that back. Let me just say on the depression and the veterans issue, if I can comment on
Sure,
that.
of course.
So in the studies that have been done in depression, these substances have been shown to be as effective as standard antidepressants, but not more. So the claim that they're transformative and they would be a big improvement on what we have now is actually disproven with the research we have so far, at least on depression. On PTSD, they may have some benefits, and if they're proven effective, I think we would love to prescribe these medications to veterans with PTSD in a medically supervised, safe setting when we know they're effective. And if we don't know they're effective, we could just be giving them harmful drugs and without helping them, and that would harm the veterans.
We're talking to Dr. Nassir Ghaemi, who wants a no vote on this question, and Emily Oneschuk, who wants a yes vote. Doctor, I want to stay with you for a second. The most comprehensive analysis, unbiased, not taking position on all 5 ballot questions, was done by the Center for State Policy Analysis at Tufts. And you mentioned the patient you had who had a horrible outcome. Let me read what they said. There are 2 states that have some variation on this. The narrow version, just psilocybin in licensed clinics in Oregon. No notable health incidents have been reported, but data is limited as the state added information gathering, et cetera. Colorado, which is much more expansive, more drugs, more settings, you can grow at home. Some psychedelics pose health risks, but we haven't seen severe impacts in Colorado where they've been legal for years. So no one is questioning your individual case. But as a whole, in the 2 states that are ahead of Massachusetts, the results seem not to be nearly as dire as you're projecting them to be.
Well, the data gathering in Oregon has been quite limited. They spoke at the State House in the spring and more or less said so. A couple comments on this. One is ibogaine, one of the 5 substances, is known to cause cardiac arrhythmias and cardiac arrest. So there's no question that one of these substances is medically dangerous. And in terms of car accidents, which we're concerned about, and emergency room visits have doubled with hallucinogens in the past decade in their current usage in the country. And
Do you support outlawing alcohol?
No.
Why? I mean, what you're describing to me as a layperson sounds
I get
like
it.
a mild version of what alcohol
I get
causes.
it, but listen, drug driving in Massachusetts is leading to driver's license revocations has increased 65% in the last few years. States which have legalized cannabis have a 4% higher fatality rate, which means that 12 people a year would die in this state extra because of that. And that's just a conservative estimate. So the point is, of course, people have alcohol access, and we try to handle drunk driving. But if you take 18 grams of mescaline, which this bill allows, which is 36 times more than the average dose, you will have visual hallucinations. And you won't, if you were on mescaline right now, Jim, you wouldn't know where you are. But you would get behind a car.
Some days I don't know where I am, and I'm not on mescaline. Emily, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, respond to that, and then I have a question for you too, Emily. Go ahead.
I mean, I think like Jim was saying, like these pose risks just like alcohol poses risks, just like cannabis poses risks, just like taking too much Tylenol poses a risk. And the way we see mitigating those risks is education, open conversations, right? Like talking less about it doesn't make anyone safer. You have to educate about it. You have to discuss how to use these things safely. Otherwise, everyone's just in a Google rabbit hole on a Reddit page.
I'm sorry, Emily. Mescaline is not Tylenol.
Well, can we talk about one drug that's on this?
Hold on.
Go ahead,
One
Marjorie.
thing I want to say that seems to me different from this. You take a medicine for antidepressant, whatever it is, and you need to keep taking it. One of the things that seems unusual about this, and this has been true, you've read about this back to William James talking about variety of religious experience, or people talking about psychedelics in general, that experiences on psychedelics can stay with you.
Yes.
What you, it's an experience of seeing things in a different way, which is different than taking Prozac or anything else.
Yeah, I've never heard of anyone having a religious experience on Prozac. Yeah, so these experiences, I can speak to myself personally, and a lot of other people I know, fundamentally shifted how I viewed myself, how I viewed the world around me in a really positive manner, right? It's not something you take every day. I've maybe come back to these at some point in my life when I want to feel reconnected to something, but it's not a traditional medication in that I don't have to take it every day, and it's not mitigating symptoms. It's changing how I feel about
Yeah.
myself.
Can we,
And-
I
and-
want
and
to
let me
focus,
just say, that
just
could
one
be
second.
okay.
I want to focus on something the doctor said a minute ago. Emily, the one drug, and I think there are 5 drugs, psychedelics or hallucinogens that are legalized under this Ibogaine. The doctor is right, obviously he's right.
Yes.
Their acute cardiac problems can result. I ask you the same question I asked you to begin with. Why include, unlike psilocybin, where there's very little evidence of horrible reactions, some, but very little, why include a drug like Ibogaine where there is evidence that really serious problems can result, particularly for the homegrown person who's not under some supervision?
So I'll say with Ibogaine, it'd be pretty impossible to grow it here. It's a bush that only grows in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's that
But it's
piece.
in the question.
It is in the question because the use of it is incredibly powerful for specifically treating addiction. I know more than 3 people that have, completely moved away from opiate addiction because of their treatment with Ibogaine, and it's incredibly powerful. And that's what this is about: is providing people options that they don't.
So to
have.
be clear, you're basically saying since it's very unlikely to be grown here, it would probably only be available in
Yes.
these supervised settings.
Yes.
Okay.
Doctor, one of the things I wondered about, we're all talking about the legislature, which I find ridiculous, actually, because we have the least effective legislature in the country, and the reason the marijuana question wound up in the ballot here, because despite people wanting it
3 times.
Yeah, exactly, because the legislature and lawmakers were all opposed to even recreational marijuana for the most part. Anyway, one of the things that seems to be appealing here, I'm not dying yet, but there seems to be a lot of use of these drugs when people are dying to ease anxiety as they deal with their pain or their fear of death and stuff. I mean, what about that?
We support the medical use of these drugs by medical professionals in a supervised medical setting. This ballot question specifically excludes medical professionals and puts it in the hands of high school diploma people, and or just grow it yourself in your bedroom. So
But
you
the thing-
can't safely use it that
But
way.
in practicality, are any doctors going to the homes of people that are dying
No, we
and giving
have-
them psilocybin?
We have
Because-
psychiatrists who practice, some of whom support the question, who practice in our hospitals giving these drugs for oncology cancer patients. We have no problem with what those doctors are doing.
So
We
they're
have a
giving
problem.
DMT and psilocybin in these particular drugs? I
Low
thought
dose
they w-
psilocybin for people with cancer to help them ease their experience.
And what's the
essentially.
law there?
I think some of that might be under research protocols. I'm not sure. I'd have to check that. But
Okay.
again, we're not opposed to medical use, but this is not medical use. This is full-scale legalization in an unregulated. And by the way, for-profit way, if I can say, $5 million have been spent to get this bill on the ballot, paying people to get signatures for the question, and for the advertising that's happened in favor of it. And we doctors are all just volunteers. And we would not be here if there weren't billions to be made in this marketplace.
Well, there are some strange people that are supporting this. Peter Thiel, Steve Bannon,
So-
Matt Gates.
So
you know,
those folks haven't.
the guy that was
No, you go ahead. Emily.
Yeah, so those folks haven't funded our ballot initiative. Peter
Okay.
Thiel, who I read your newsletters, by the way, Peter Thiel is not funding our ballot.
But nationwide, they're involved in this. They're
I
in
believe he's
favor of
involved
this.
in it.
But a bunch of tech millionaires are.
Let
in
Em-
favor of
let
that.
Emily respond, please.
So the folks that are supporting our ballot are people that I've got to know personally, right? And they're doing this because they care about it, because they've had family members struggle with mental health, because they see it as an improvement to what is a failing mental health system, right? And they're people. They live here in Massachusetts. They care about this just like I care about it.
Well,
Can I this is a hard question to ask in light of what Marjorie said about how we do have, according to independent research, the least effective legislature in the country. A brief answer, you acknowledge there could be some serious benefit from some of these drugs. You're nodding in agreement.
yes, some of them.
And some people believe that your ballot question goes too far. There's a history in this state where questions that have been on the ballot, I can think of at least 2 instances, one of which I was involved in, where the 2 parties got together, reached a compromise, went to the legislature and basically said, regardless of what happens on election day, yes or a no, this is what we want you to pass as a compromise. Starting with you, is that something you'd engage in if it turns out that that Dr. Ghaemi and others were willing to move in your direction, even if not as far as you'd like?
Yeah, well, I think, Jim, you brought it up. You said it exactly earlier, right? This will go to the legislature if it passes and will change, right? And like,
No, I didn't say would change.
well,
I said it could change.
Could change.
Yeah.
Could change. And I think the way we build the best law for Massachusetts is to have a lot of voices like doctors and patients and a lot of other folks who care about this come together to make it what we need it to be.
Dr. Ghaemi, tell us what in this question you could support if it was, just so we understand where you're coming from,
Yeah.
if they were standalone. I know they're not, but just so people understand, standalone, separate pieces.
So I'm just speaking for myself now. I
Fine.
can't speak for anybody
That's
else.
fine.
But I think very low dose psilocybin in a medically supervised setting with a medical professional or a mental health professional for PTSD alone, where the possible benefit is being suggested, I think that's possible. But outside of that, the public health harms far outweigh any possible benefit that this question has.
And forgive me if you discussed this before, but why is the homegrown part so important to your bill?
So the homegrown piece, again, this is, I think, with decrim, we're just meeting what's already going on. People can buy these they can buy grow kits online. They can grow them in their houses right now. 8 cities and towns in Massachusetts, including Somerville, Cambridge, and Salem, have already decriminalized. This is already happening with no regulation on it whatsoever. So this puts parameters on it, and we're just trying to meet the reality of what's going on.
Okay.
How about that, Doctor? I mean, I think it's 8 cities and towns that have voted in local ballot campaigns to allow this to happen. Would imperfect rules and regulations, which you would argue this is, aren't they better than none, which is what we currently have?
No, because we think that the public health harms far outweigh the theoretical benefits that are unproven with these substances. They're not even benefits, it's just recreational use. And if you're going to, by doing that, kill 12 people a year extra in car accidents, disable an extra 100 people, fill up our emergency rooms more than they already are with the current tragedies where people are not getting prompt medical care. We just think, the Mass Medical Society, American Psychiatric Association, Mass Psych Society, that this harms the public health far
But
more.
I hate to be a broken record. I'll quote myself. This is alcohol. Is this in spades? I mean, the impact is many times worse than the impact you're describing
but
here.
when you take one drink, you are not going to have visual hallucinations where you don't know where you are. This is a different level.
Could you, do you have one thing to say, and then we'd like you both to give us a closing thought?
Absolutely. Well, I just want to hit on what he says with this, saying this isn't effective is kind of insulting to me and the people sitting in this crowd that have come to support me that have also benefited from this. So I just find that to be
If I
undermining.
can
No,
answer
let
that.
her-
I
no,
didn't say that.
Let her finish, and then
Yeah.
you can say whatever you'd like. Go ahead.
No, I think, of course I want more research, of course I want more data, but I also can't ignore myself and the hundreds of other people that I've met through this campaign that have really benefited from this.
So why don't you respond if you choose, Doctor, and then give us 30 or 45 seconds, sort of a wrap-up argument for people still unsure what they're going to do on question 4.
Let me just say, I was in medical school in the 1980s, and my first experience was in the VA with Vietnam veterans. I've worked with the Army in screening people who want to join the military during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. I'm very collaborative with colleagues in the VA system. I never said that these drugs don't work for PTSD. I said they're not proven to work. And actually, the only drug studied, MDMA, ecstasy, is not one of the 5 substances in this bill. So I'm not saying they don't work. I'm saying we don't really know that they work. And with all of the harms that we do know, the harms outweigh the potential benefits.
Why should people vote yes? One more time,
Yeah.
Emily.
So again, the two-pronged approach. We have the regulated therapeutic structure that's going to be up and running. We have decriminalization, and for me personally, I know these work because they changed my life. I know that 7 years ago, right, I lost my little brother. I was in immense pressure under national news. I went through 5 years on active duty where I endured a series of very unpleasant experiences and came out with a host of diagnoses, PTSD and depression and anxiety. And I did what I was supposed to do at the VA, and that didn't help me. And these did, and I had to travel to Jamaica to go do them. And if I did them here, I could have been criminally penalized. So it's also not just about me, right? There's 17 veterans commit suicide every day. This doesn't just help veterans, this helps people with all kinds of issues. And we need other options. I don't think, I think everyone here can agree that we're in a mental health crisis and our current options aren't serving us.
Do you have a website? Yes, sir?
We do.
What is it?
maformentalhealth.org.
maformentalhealth.org. Doctor, is there a no website?
I don't know, actually. We're a bunch of volunteer doctors. I don't think we've
If
gotten
you
around
find
to it.
out later today before 2 o'clock that there is, if you contact us,
I
we'll
think
make
there's
sure
a coalition, but I don't know what their website
we'll
is.
check it out.
Yeah.
Thank you both for your time. We really
Well,
appreciate
could
you
I
being
just get a final comment?
I thought that was your final
no,
comment.
you didn't. She had a final statement.
You have 15 seconds.
I
Take it.
appreciate it. Well, you know, for every person who does well, we doctors see patients who do very poorly, and they deserve to be known about as well. And the public's health matters. This ballot question, funded by venture capitalists, is not about public health. It's about private wealth and recreational use and abuse. We stand for public health, and we ask you to vote no.
Thank you both. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.